Ancient artifacts carved by grief, cities stitched from ruins, gods etched in stone then forgotten. Across continents and centuries, ancient minds left behind more than relics. They left puzzles, a shipwreck with no ship, a desert face that doesn't belong, a language buried and maybe silenced. Some sites were meant to honor the heavens, others to appease what lay beneath, but all remain unfinished stories, missing their final page. In this journey we explore 7 artifacts that refuse to explain themselves, from the haunted waters of Maya sacrifice, to the stone sanctuaries of the Hittites, to gardens, temples and tablets that whisper more than they tell. What do these fragments hide? And what happens when the past won't answer back? This is more than history. Welcome to Riddle Me This Mysteries. Who sculpts nightmares into garden paths? Who builds monsters with mouths wide enough to swallow you and calls it art? In the wooded hills of Bomarzo, in central Italy's Lazio region, a garden waits that was never meant to soothe. It was carved in grief, not glory. They call it the Sacro Bosco, the sacred grove, but most know it as the Garden of Monsters. Around 1552, Pier Francesco Orsini, a nobleman, soldier and former prisoner of war, returned from captivity under Charles V only to suffer another blow, the death of his beloved wife, Giulia Farnese. Shattered, he began creating something no one had seen before. Not a tomb, not a chapel, but a forest of nightmares carved in stone. More than 30 sculptures, shaped from local peperino tuff, emerged from the landscape over decades. Grotesque faces, clashing dragons, sleeping nymphs, mermaids, giants, and a monstrous fish-headed Neptune rising from the earth. There's Hercules battling Cacus, sirens with twisted smiles, and a leaning house that throws off all sense of balance, a building designed to be disorienting. At the garden's heart, a stone ogre gapes open-mouthed. Step inside and your voice disappears. Over the entrance, carved in Latin, the inscription reads, Ogni pensiero vola. Every thought flies. Elsewhere in the park, another cryptic message awaits, Sol per sfogare il cor, only to set the heart free. But what was Orsini freeing? Some believe the park was a deeply personal mourning ritual, not just a tribute to Giulia, but an alchemical path through grief, where monsters stood in for emotional chaos. Others see satire, a rejection of Renaissance ideals, twisting beauty into absurdity. Its layout has no symmetry, no classical order, just raw emotional disorder. The garden was never meant to impress courtiers or kings. It was private. After Orsini's death in 1585, it was swallowed by forest and largely forgotten until rediscovered in the 20th century. When Salvador Dali visited in the 1950s, he called it a true surrealist masterpiece, hundreds of years ahead of its time. In the 1970s, restoration efforts began, led by the Bettini family, who still maintain it today. Despite decades of study, no one can fully decode the park's language. Is it a labyrinth of symbols, a dreamscape, a descent into the underworld guarded by monsters born of memory? Or was it never meant to be understood, only felt? Now we leave the stone mouths and twisted beasts behind and descend into a silence carved for gods. Buried under centuries of silt, Tanis shouldn't look like this. Its statues still rise from the mud with crowns intact. Colossal granite blocks lie scattered like fallen chess pieces. Golden masks, untouched by tomb robbers, glint beneath collapsed roofs. And yet no myth survives it. No legend names it. No priest once whispered its name into eternity. This city held kings, gods, and treasure, and the world forgot it existed. Tanis emerged in the wake of collapse. After the New Kingdom fractured and Thebes lost its grip on power, Egypt's center of gravity shifted north. Around 1070 BCE, a man named Smendes seized control of the delta and declared Tanis the new capital of Egypt. It became the seat of the 21st dynasty, not by building from scratch, but by borrowing the bones of the past. Its stone came from elsewhere. Entire sanctuaries were dismantled from Pi Ramesses, the former royal seat nearby, abandoned as its harbors silted up. Obelisks were dragged from Heliopolis. Statues and columns arrived from Bubastis. Temples of gods were reassembled block by block, name by name. But these names didn't always match. Inscriptions were carved over, royal identities blurred. Tanis was a patchwork, a city of sacred echoes. During the early 11th century BCE, under Susens I, Tanis became more than a political center. It grew into a spiritual fortress. He commissioned massive structures honoring Amun-Ra, complete with courts, pylons, and statuary meant to rival Karnak. He was buried here in a sarcophagus of pink granite, resting beneath a golden funerary mask that would remain untouched for nearly 3,000 years. The city continued to rise under kings like Osorkon II in the 9th century BCE, who left behind towering obelisks and expanded temple courts. But what looked eternal was already beginning to fade. Later, dynasties shifted power again. Memphis took precedence. Then Sais, then foreign rulers came, and the sacred city of Tanis began to slip below the Nile's heavy breath. No Greek historian ever mentioned it. No great war was fought here. The gods were silent, and eventually so was the land. Then, in 1939, French archaeologist Pierre Montet broke through the mud and into history. Beneath layers of rubble, he uncovered royal tombs filled with gold, silver, and amulets of turquoise and lapis. The burial of Suzanne I was intact, undisturbed since the day the tomb was sealed. The mask, the silver coffin, the ceremonial jewelry, all preserved as if waiting. But the world barely noticed. Months later, war erupted in Europe, and Tanis vanished from headlines just as quickly as it had returned from the dust. Today, the site still sits on the fringe of Egypt's tourist trail. Most of its grandeur lies shattered and sunken. Yet beneath that silence, something deeper is stirring. In the past few years, archaeologists have returned with new tools: ground-penetrating radar, electrical tomography, and satellite mapping. What they found is startling. Whole sectors of Tanis remain buried. Temple layouts, courtyard walls, hidden chambers, all hidden beneath layers of Nile silt. The ancient city isn't just damaged, it's incomplete. More than that, it's confused. Some monuments were never finished. Others were repurposed so many times their meanings collapse in on themselves. Stones speak in many voices, and none agree. And this might be the strangest truth of all. Tanis was not a city in decline. It was a city of disguise. A sanctuary built to look eternal, with pieces of the past rearranged like stage props. Pharaohs buried here wore the symbols of old glory, but ruled in a time of fragmentation. Their temples felt timeless, but they were stitched together from ruins. What does it mean to move a sacred place? To take a god from one land and plant him in another's soil? Can stone remember what it once meant? And if not, what kind of city does that make? Here, memory was carved from ruins, but not all ancient remains stay where they were left. Some vanish into the sea, leaving only traces. Off the rocky coast of the small Greek island of Dokos, something ancient lies scattered beneath shallow, silent water. It isn't a ship. No planks, no sail, no mast, just fragments, clay vessels cracked by time, strewn like broken thoughts across the seabed. And yet this is the oldest known underwater shipwreck in the world. It dates to between 2700 and 2200 BCE, placing it deep within the early Helladic II period. This was an age when sea routes were still forming, and coastal settlements across the Aegean had only begun to exchange goods over water. A time before writing in Greece, when trade existed only in gesture, weight, and memory. The wreck was first discovered in 1975 by underwater archaeologist Peter Throckmorton, but it wasn't until 1989 to 1992 that the Hellenic Institute of Marine Archaeology, HIMA, led by George Papathanasopoulos, began systematic excavations. What they uncovered wasn't a hull or a keel, it was a puzzle. More than 500 ceramic vessels lay across the seafloor: amphorae, sauceboats, hydrias, basins, stirrup jars, containers used to store oil, wine, grain, and other trade goods. Some were made of clay local to the Argolid, others hinted at connections with Attica and the Cyclades. These weren't random sherds. They were cargo deliberately packed and arranged, the remains of a planned voyage. But there were no tools, no bones, no anchors, and strangest of all, no trace of the ship itself. Underwater archaeologists searched for signs of a hull, preserved timbers, fastening pegs, discolorations in the sediment. Nothing. The wood had either disintegrated completely over the millennia, or was never there to be found. What kind of ship leaves behind everything except itself? Some believe the vessel ran aground on the sharp rocks between two reefs, dashed apart by a sudden gust or hidden current. The intact jars suggest the impact was swift. There was no time to salvage. Others suggest it was deliberately scuttled. Perhaps the cargo was ritually offered or offloaded in haste, but no human remains have been found, and no sign of what kind of crew might have sailed it. This site rewrites the beginning of maritime trade. The organization of the cargo, the types of vessels and their geographic signatures all imply a network, a map made from clay, linking prehistoric communities across the Aegean long before such voyages were assumed to be possible. The seabed became a record where no scroll was ever written. Today, the artifacts rest in the Spetses Museum, arranged much as they were found, unlabeled by language, untethered to any known merchant, kingdom, or myth. The ship remains an inference. Its shape, size, and origin are guesses drawn from the void it left behind. Dokos leaves us with a strange kind of silence, the kind where the cargo survives but the vessel is gone, where the goods reach no destination and the journey ends without a trace. Nothing of the ship remains, only fragments, but in the next ruin we find thousands of words and still no clear meaning. They expected rubble. They found 17,000 voices pressed into clay, buried for 4,000 years. Some spoke of trade, some sang hymns to forgotten gods, and some whispered names the world thought were myth. In 1975, at a dig site in northern Syria called Tel Mardik, archaeologists uncovered the ruins of a royal palace. Inside its collapsed chambers lay something unexpected. Thousands of clay tablets, still stacked where scribes had left them nearly 4 millennia earlier. The city was Ebla, once a major power of the 3rd millennium BCE, long forgotten, but suddenly speaking again. At its peak between 2500 and 2250 BCE, Ebla controlled a vast network of trade and diplomacy across the Levant and Mesopotamia. The archive captured a civilization in full, not just power and diplomacy, but law, belief, and daily ritual, all rendered in remarkable detail. What made the discovery even more astonishing was the language. The tablets were written in Sumerian cuneiform, but adapted to an entirely unknown Semitic dialect, older than Akkadian. Deciphering it opened a door to a lost culture, revealing a society that predated and rivaled its better-known neighbors. But then came the names. Early translations included cities like Sodom, Gomorrah, and Jerusalem, the ancient form of Jerusalem. These claims ignited immediate controversy. If accurate, they would push back written references to these sites by 1,000 years. Supporters saw validation of ancient traditions. Critics accused translators of forcing meaning onto coincidence. But as the controversy faded, a deeper silence took its place. Not all tablets were published. Some were held back. Access to the full archive grew limited. The reasons were never clearly explained. Political tensions, religious pressure, academic control. Even now, thousands of tablets remain unpublished, unread, untranslated, or simply unavailable. The palace that held them had collapsed in fire, likely around 2300 BCE, during the campaigns of Sargon of Akkad or his grandson Naram-Sin. The falling roof sealed the archive in ash, preserving it perfectly, like Pompeii, but for words. The scribes' work was frozen in time, their voices survived, but their meaning remains debated. Some tablets list gods now lost to history, others name cities never found. There are school exercises, royal decrees, lists of sacrifices, all of it detailed, meticulous, and incomplete. Ebla left us a library, but not a key. Today, scholars continue to analyze and debate. New technologies have helped revive some fragments, but many questions are still unanswered. Were some tablets kept from view because they threatened established narratives? Or are they simply waiting for someone patient enough to unlock them? Ebla left behind thousands of words, some too strange to translate, some perhaps too dangerous to publish. But what comes next doesn't try to speak at all, and still manages to say even more. Some faces don't explain themselves. They simply stare back, intact, unblinking, untouched by time. In the bone-dry deserts of China's far western Tarim Basin, archaeologists uncovered hundreds of astonishingly preserved human remains. Men, women, and children buried beneath layers of salt and sand, their skin still leathery, their hair still braided, their expressions frozen. Some were laid to rest as early as 2100 BCE, and yet their features seem out of place. High cheekbones, deep-set eyes, light-colored hair, wool cloaks, felt hats, leather boots, and silence. They became known as the Tarim Mummies, but their faces didn't match the landscape. Why did people with such seemingly Western features end up buried in one of the most remote parts of East Asia, thousands of kilometers from any civilization that looked like them? The most famous among them, including the beauty of Lulung, buried around 1800 BCE, and the Chichén man, looked at first glance more like travelers from Europe than ancient Central Asians. Another just as haunting was found at the Xiaohe cemetery. A woman known as the Princess of Xiaohe, sealed in a wooden coffin wrapped in cowhide. Her red hair, felt garments, and peaceful expression seemed disarmingly recent. Local legends had whispered about ancient graves in the desert for generations, but it wasn't until the 1980s and 1990s that systematic excavations began at sites like Kurigul, Chichén, and Xiaohe, revealing dozens of mummies with astonishing preservation and elaborate burials. Infants were swaddled in cattle hide. Adults were interred with woven baskets, barley, wooden masks, and something stranger. In 2014, residue on some of the dead revealed the oldest known dairy product in history, a kefir-like cheese still smeared on their necks and chests. This wasn't just a burial, it was ritualized preservation. These people understood fermentation, textile making, and ceremonial offerings in a way that seemed far ahead of their time. Early theories suggested they came from the West, Indo-European migrants linked to the Yamnaya or Andronovo cultures pushing eastward through the steppes. Their tools, clothing, and physical features seemed to align. But then came the DNA. In 2021, a landmark genomic study revealed something no one expected. These earliest Tarim people weren't migrants at all. They belonged to an isolated population, deeply rooted in the region, with no direct ties to any known Western steppe groups. Their genetic ancestry was mostly ancient North Eurasian, with traces of Northeast Asian lineage. They weren't outsiders, they were originals, and yet they looked like no one else. Even more curious, they had no cities, no writing, no architecture. They lived in small communities, buried their dead in boat-shaped coffins, and yet possessed advanced skills in weaving, food preservation, and long-distance exchange. Trade goods from faraway lands appeared among their grave goods, though their own origins remained local and mysterious. Only after 1000 BCE did new peoples enter the Tarim Basin, mixing with the descendants of the original population. But by then, the unique faces were already fading, the genetic signature diluted, and the story of the originals vanishing into myth. Today, many of the mummies remain off-limits, either held in museums or sealed from public view due to political tensions. The questions they raise about migration, ethnicity, and history remain sensitive. Some bodies are studied, others simply stored. Their meaning, like their faces, lies in stasis. They do not speak, they do not move, but they remain. And sometimes what survives isn't a ruin or a text. It's a body, one that still resists being categorized. They left no temples, no writing, only faces preserved in silence. But the next mystery wasn't hidden. It was carved in plain sight, with gods arranged in lines no one can explain. In this place, stone didn't just hold images, it held order. Lines of gods carved into limestone walls, not for art, but for something more calculated, more celestial. Just outside the ancient city of Hattusa, capital of the Hittite Empire, lies Yazılıkaya, an open-air sanctuary used between the 13th and 12th centuries BCE near the empire's twilight. From afar, it's easy to miss, a narrow passage between natural rock outcrops. But step inside, and you enter a different logic, one ruled by divine math. 2 chambers, cut from living stone. In Chamber A, over 60 reliefs, gods, goddesses, mythic hybrids, arranged in opposing processions. On one side, male deities march in profile. On the other, their female counterparts. They all converge at the center, where the Hittite storm god Teshub locks arms with Shaushka, a goddess with dual aspects, a union of opposites, creation and balance, day and night. But this isn't just religious art. Since 2019, scholars have advanced a powerful reinterpretation. Yazılıkaya was a timekeeping device. Its layout encodes a lunisolar calendar, using the number of deities, their sequence and spatial placement to represent lunar cycles and solar transitions. Some figures may symbolize the 354 days of the lunar year. Others point towards seasonal divisions. The chamber wasn't only sacred, it was systematic, and it didn't stop at the heavens. Chamber B, darker and narrower, lies slightly lower. It holds fewer gods, mostly underworld figures. Here, time doesn't march, it waits. The walls depict 12 underworld gods standing in still formation, weapons in hand, silent and unblinking. It's as if Chamber A represented life, order, renewal, while Chamber B whispered of what comes after. Together, the two spaces create a vertical cosmology: sky above, earth in the middle, netherworld below. And Yazılıkaya may have been the axis, the pivot where the three met. The Hittite New Year, tied to the spring equinox, likely used this space for renewal rituals. The sanctuary was both a temple and a clock. But no text confirms any of this. No inscription explains the logic. The meanings are inferred, debated, revised, and after the Hittite collapse around 1200 BCE, Yazılıkaya faded. Rediscovered in 1834 by French explorer Charles Texier, it continues to puzzle archaeologists, astronomers, and historians alike. Why mark time with gods? Why carve eternity into rock and then leave no guide? Perhaps that was the point. Not to answer, but to endure. These gods didn't fade. They stood in formation, waiting. But in our next site, there are no guardians, only a void and what was thrown into it. They didn't build a temple here. They didn't leave an inscription. But the Maya built something far more enduring, a question. North of the Great Pyramid of Kukulkan, beyond the ball courts, columns, and temples, lies a natural sinkhole called the sacred cenote. To the casual eye, it's a wide pool of water framed by limestone walls and jungle vines. But to the people of Chichén Itzá, it was something more. Not a pond, not a well, a portal. Between 600 and 1200 CE, the cenote became the spiritual axis of one of the most powerful cities in the Maya world. At its height around 900 CE, Chichén Itzá was a hub of culture, trade, and belief. And the cenote stood at its center, connecting the world of the living to the realm of the gods. Its presence shaped ritual, politics, and fear. In the early 1900s, American explorer Edward Thompson dredged the cenote illegally, hauling out hundreds of ritual offerings: gold discs, jade beads, carved bone, obsidian blades, copper bells. Many came from distant lands, Panama, central Mexico, the Caribbean, suggesting Chichén Itzá's reach extended far beyond the Yucatan. But alongside the treasures were human remains, burned, broken, young. Then came 1967. Archaeologists excavating a nearby Chultun, a kind of underground cistern, discovered over 100 skeletons, primarily boys between the ages of 3 and 11. Some were twins. Many bore marks of precise cuts. Analysis suggested they were related, siblings, cousins, perhaps selected for reasons lost to time. They weren't buried. They were arranged, left as an offering. But what for? The cenote was sacred to Chak, the Maya rain god. In drought years, ceremonies intensified. Some believe offerings and lives were cast into the water to call down rain. Others see echoes of Maya creation myths, where gods and heroes entered the underworld through caves and water. In their creation story, the Popol Vuh, twin brothers, descend into that shadowy realm, face its trials, and return transformed. Perhaps these children too were seen as twins reborn, symbols of cosmic renewal. And yet, there is no surviving text to explain these rites. No stele, no painted murals, just rumors and silence. What remains is strange in its scale. Gold hammered into shapes never found elsewhere. Jade carved with glyphs no one understands. Skeletal remains stripped of name, role, or voice. In 2024, a new round of DNA testing confirmed what was long suspected. Most of those offered were local, not captives. This wasn't conquest. This was something internal, something chosen. And still, no one knows why. Today, tourists lean over the stone rim and peer into green-black water, unaware of what rests beneath. The cenote has been dredged, drained, studied, mapped, but never truly explained. It is a question that deepens as it clears. We walked among giants carved from stone, stood where a Renaissance forest turned into a gallery of riddles. We uncovered a temple swallowed by delta sands and dove to the seabed where the oldest shipwreck left only silence. We read clay voices buried beneath a burning palace, saw faces dried by desert winds yet still full of memory, and stood at the edge of a sacred abyss where questions were thrown into darkness and nothing came back. 7 places, 7 offerings, each preserved just enough to unsettle us. They were not meant to be understood at once, but maybe they weren't left for us to solve, only to remember. If any of these echoes stayed with you, let them ripple outward. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't. Share the mystery, Let others follow the trail. There are more ruins ahead, more riddles to awaken. Until next time, only on Riddle Me This Mysteries.